Welcome to the Public Voice Salon. We're an open dialogue on education, the arts, and social change, not necessarily in that order. And we have the great delight and pleasure to feature Richard Schechner today, one of the pioneers of performance studies. And so today we're going to learn something about what performance studies is. Richard actually was one of the people who credited to creating this new genre in the late 1960s. He is also a very wonderful and respected director and a man of the theater. And if I gave his whole background here, it would take the entire hour. So we're going to just go short with that. And you're going to learn something about this erudite, charming, wonderful, interesting person.
My God.
From his, we're in his Greenwich Village studio here, okay? One of the giants of performance studies. It is our great honor to welcome Richard to our show today. And full confession, Richard is a friend. I got to meet him studying for a doctorate in leadership. In education, and they said, well, find somebody who's interesting, who's a leader, and interview them. And I picked Richard Schechner, and so we've known each other now for a couple of years. So anyway, it's a great honor and delight to be here, Richard. And let's begin at the beginning as far as performance studies. I know something about academia and how difficult it is to create a new genre.
It's not a genre,
or
a new field.
A new field.
A genre would be something like comedy, tragedy, those are, or
yes,
styles of, but a new academic field.
I got you. Talk a little bit, maybe educate our audience about how this came about. And
well, the idea that performance is an expanded range of behaviors, not just theater, dance, and music, not just the performing arts, but behavior in everyday life, in sports, in the professions, like medicine. That idea goes back quite some time. I don't want to go into the whole history of it, but a sociologist, anthropologist, Irving Goffman, wrote a book called The Presentation of Self in Everyday Life, which was published in England in 1956, but was issued in the United States in its standard edition in 1959. And the second chapter of that book is called Performance. And in it, Goffman defined what he felt was a performance, which is the presentation of yourself consciously before someone else. Now, that's a very, very large and broad category. He used the theatrical paradigm to parse this out, to make it understandable. And that has been around even longer, obviously. There's Shakespeare, All the World's a Stage, and that idea that we are in a performance in the Indo-European tradition goes back even further to the Sanskrit epics of the Ramayana and the Mahabharata, where they're called the instance of the appearance of the avatars, for example, the gods of Krishna and Ram, the incarnations of Vishnu, are involved in a Leela, in a play, and literally they are performing their roles on the earth. So this notion goes way, way back. Now, I got involved in it. I had read Goffman in the late, early 60s, 59, 60, when that book came out. And not to go too much into my biography because it's a complex biography, but at that point I was leaving the United States Army, where I served for 2 years, and I was going to college to get my PhD at Tulane University in theater in New Orleans. At the same time, I was very active in the civil rights movement, as it was called at that time, and also the movement against the war in Vietnam. And both of these activities involved going into the streets or into public places and doing things such as a sit-in or what we call a demonstration. Now, a demonstration is a performative word. It's a word that really implies a performance. You're showing something. So I was among the first to be arrested for a sit-in in New Orleans, where me and a few black people, couple of black young men and a woman from Tulane also. We went to the Maison Blanche, the White House, coffee counter in New Orleans and asked to be served a cup of coffee. Of course, it was segregation. We were arrested. We weren't, but we knew we were going there in order to make a claim. Of course, if they had served us the coffee, that would have been great. We would have integrated that lunch counter, and it would have meant a big advance. We weren't expecting that to happen, and it didn't. But we knew that we wanted the press to be there. We wanted it to be known that we were doing this. So we were performing. I realized at that point, having read Goffman and so on, that this was a performance. And there were other things as well. So in social life, there were performances all around me. And I began to theorize and try to construct what this might mean. And I wrote an essay, which I published in 1965, called Approaches to Theory and Criticism. And in that essay, I laid out the basis for what was to become performance studies. That is, that there are performance activities of human beings. They are play, sports, rituals, arts, entertainment, performances in everyday life, and that this constituted a spectrum, a range of performances that included things such as the church mass of the Roman Catholic Church, like the eat, this is my flesh, drink, this is my blood. That's also a performance, the Eucharist, or the Passover Seder, which is, of course, related to that gesture of Jesus. He was at a Passover Seder when he said he raised the matzah, the wafer, and the wine, and he had the first Eucharist, and other religions as well. Particularly in the United States, the black church early on deeply combined arts, entertainment, music, preaching, and worship. So if you go to as I did to a black church in the Deep South, it was extremely participatory. The preacher would preach, but people would respond and answer back. There would be singing. People would go into the aisles and dance and move, so that it was a completely performative event. So all of these things factored into performance studies, but that still did not make a department of performance studies. That was the idea and the theory, which I structured, as I say, in the mid-1960s and on into the early 70s, a whole set of essays which I published in two books, one called Public Domain in 1968 and another called Performance Theory, which has gone through a various number of editions. At the same time, I was beginning to make performances, art performances that were related to this. I was very influenced by the thinking of John Cage and Alan Caprow, who initiated the first happenings and coined the term happenings, and I participated in some of the early happenings that Caprow did, and that these were events that were participatory, that were not art that you looked at, but art that you did, and he called them environments. And to make a long story short, I started to do theater in that style. I did a couple of performances in New Orleans before I left New Orleans, one called 466 in April 1966, where I worked with a visual artist, Frank Adams, and a musician, Paul Epstein, and we did a series of happening-like performances within the context of 466, of this one event. And then in the spring of 1967, I did an environmental theater production of Victims of Duty, a play by Eugene Ionesco, which was staged not in a regular theater. It was staged in a large room that the audience sat on platforms all around the room. The action took place in and among the audience. There was different forms of participation. And from that, I wrote an essay called Axioms for Environmental Theater, in which I said that all of the space should be used by the performers, all of the space should be used by the audience, that there should be participation, that a literary text need not be the beginning or the end of a performance. It laid out the theoretical basis for a lot of performance art that came later. And then in 1973, I published a book called Environmental Theater, which encapsulated all this and my practices. By then, I had moved to New York. I had moved to New York in the fall of 1967, and in 1968 I opened a production called Dionysus in '69 at a theater in Soho, actually the first theater in Soho, south of Houston in New York, called the Performing Garage. It still is in existence, and actually I was at the Performing Garage 2 days ago to see the Wooster Group's production of Richard Foreman's Symphony of Rats, directed by Liz Lecomte, who was my assistant director at one point many years ago. At any rate, Dionysus in '69 was a version of Euripides' The Bacchae, a Greek tragedy, but it was extremely participatory, involved the audience, had the audience placed and sitting all over in the room in different configurations, combined improvisation and set text. Some of it took place in the street outside the theater. It was a very radical production, and it was very successful at the box office. The New York Times critic liked it very much, and that guaranteed us a full house. And using that production and my Victims of Duty and other productions by other people, I wrote this book, Environmental Theater. Then skip ahead a little bit until the mid to late 70s, or actually back in the mid 70s, I met the anthropologist Victor Turner. Now that's a whole other story. And I'll maybe get into it a little later, but Victor and I became not only very, very close friends, we became collaborators. And we did workshops together and conferences together. And also we did one stupendous workshop at the Performing Garage, which is his theater, and which involved Irving Goffman, who came from Philadelphia, and he was one of the co-teachers, and Turner was a co-teacher, and me, and Barbara Meyerhoff, who was a great anthropologist from Southern California, and Edith Turner, Turner's wife, and Alexandra Lalonde, anthropologist from Columbia. We did this 2 or 3 week workshop in performance, how to stage rituals, how to stage the rituals of other cultures, how to understand performances and cultures by performing them. So this began a series also of courses that I offered at NYU called Performance Theory, and I brought in anthropologists and performance artists and dancers, people from all different kinds of disciplines to this course. They would come and lecture on a Monday night, and then Tuesday during the day they would meet with the graduate students and so on and so forth. And I realized that what we were beginning to teach at NYU, because I had moved from Tulane to NYU in 1967, by the late 1970s, I realized that although we were called the drama department, we weren't teaching drama. We weren't analyzing the text of plays. We weren't dealing with Chekhov, Ibsen, Shakespeare, the Greeks, or even the Asian forms of Kalidasa or no drama. We were using some of that, but we were teaching this expanded field that didn't have a name. But in the end of the 70s, 1979, I decided that it should have its own name, and it should be called Performance Studies, because we were studying performance. It's very simple. And I invited an anthropologist, the head of the American Folklore Association, Dr. Barbara Kirshenblatt-Gimblett, who at that time was a professor at the University of Pennsylvania in Philadelphia, and we had a long lunch, and I said, you come to NYU and become chair of this new department, even though she had no training in theater, dance, music, any of that. She was an anthropologist and a folklorist, and we'll change the name of the department to Performance Studies, and you'll be its first chair. And Barbara came, and she did that, and we did change its name, and let's say the rest is history. It was the first one in the world. The second one was in the Northwestern University. They changed their name from speech and drama, I believe, to performance studies. Now there are many performance studies departments around the world. So that, in a nutshell, is the history of it. Now this story has also been told in my book, Performance Studies and Introduction, which is in its 4th edition. I'm working on its 5th edition, but there's a chapter called What is Performance Studies? So everything that I've just said in a more detailed way is laid out in that book.
Yes, yes. Wow, this is going to be required viewing for anybody who wants to have any sense of what this field is, and I am just amazed. It's always a delight to listen to you Richard, and hear this incredible story. I know something about academic life as an English professor, and I know that it's hard to bring something new in. I mean, academics are very territorial about their turf, What kind of resistance did you get?
Well, this was a new turf.
Yes,
so,
yeah.
I was lucky that the dean of the Tisch School of the Arts at that time was David Oppenheim. Now, if you've seen the movie Maestro, you'll know that at one point the movie begins with Leonard Bernstein in bed with a young man. That young man is David Oppenheim. So that the first dean of the NYU Tisch School of the Arts was a very, very good guy who was bisexual, because I knew him and his wife, Pat Jaffe. I think they're both passed on. They were very nice, and they had children and so on and so forth. But he was also loved men, and he was a lover of Leonard Bernstein. I'm not letting this out of the closet. It's there in the movie, and he's named. So, but David was an extremely generous and visionary dean. And when I came to him in 1975, 76, 77, and outlined this scheme, he said, go ahead. You have a small department. Do what you think is the right thing with it. And I had collaborators like Michael Kirby, who was the author of a book on happenings, and he worked with me on TDR, the book on happenings. Brooks McNamara, who was the archivist for the Schubert Archives on Broadway, and was an expert in popular entertainments. So these people were my partners in this construction of things. So we didn't have any academic resistance of that kind. The dean was supportive. We were the central administration allowed for the creation of this new department. We were lucky. Maybe if we had been at another place or another time, we would have had that kind of resistance, but we didn't. And we also, there were only 4 of us at that point, McNamara and Kirby, myself, and Ted Hoffman, who was a teacher of acting, and we all got along with each other. So we didn't have any of those rivalries. And then we brought in new and younger people like Peggy Phelan later on. She's now at the at Stanford University, and as I say, Barbara and others. And then at a later point, Diana Taylor, who is still at Performance Studies, and many other people. But we never had that kind of infighting or rivalry or academic civil war.
It almost seems like a paradigm for the kind of collaborative work, the kind of interdisciplinary work that we're trying to get to in the academy today, which has become so polarized.
We've tried to get to it for 150 years, and we've got to it and moved back from it. We're in a regressive period at the present moment. Hopefully it won't be a regression that'll last forever, and things go in these waves. They go up and down, but as Martin Luther King said, the arc is towards progress. So I still feel that in the long run we'll be better off than we were. Though who knows? We are also being haunted by the 4 horsemen of the contemporary apocalypse: climate change and species extinction, pollution and overpopulation. So whether they'll catch up with us or we'll be able to manage it as a species or as a set of cultures, time will tell.
And the erosion of democracy also?
Well, that's part of the consequence of this. The erosion of democracy is a kind of side effect of these other things. And it's not in and of itself a cause. For most of human history, most people never lived under democracy, right? Democracy was imperfectly practiced in ancient Athens. Only men could vote. It was a slave society, and the women had no part in it. So if it was a democracy, it was a hideously imperfect one, kind of like the U.S. before the Civil War, where also women couldn't vote and there were slaves. So if you think of the American Revolution, it was a great period, but it was not a perfect democracy by any means, not even close. After the Civil War, it got a little closer. After women got the vote, it's a little closer. Still, it's not perfect. But democracy after the Greek experiment was there for maybe a few years in Rome before Rome became imperial. and then it didn't occur again until the French and American revolutions in the 18th century. I don't think any of Asia that I know of was a democracy, and I don't think any of Africa or native Australia or the native. So democracy is a very, very small sliver of the human political experience. I prefer it because the mistakes that are made are general mistakes rather than mistakes of elites. Although within our democracy, as it's constructed, and as Eisenhower warned us, we are in the military-industrial complex. It really should be called the military-industrial academic complex because the universities have a great deal to answer for within that scheme of things. It's not just the military and the industrialists, but a lot of the basic research and thinking goes on at universities. And so that although we have a democracy in name, we don't really have a democracy in practice. And then the second thing about democracy is it a good system? In other words, what if the majority, I think the majority did want Hitler. So do we want a majority? What if the majority wants Donald J. Trump? Would you prefer a majority that wants Donald J. Trump and we live with its consequences? Or would we rather have some kind of aristocracy that said that he can't run? So that's what they tried to do with Colorado and Maine, keeping him off the ballot. Now, all said and done, having grown up in a democracy, I want to keep it and I want to defend it. And actually, I'm not pessimistic about the upcoming American election. I think Biden's going to win. I think he's going to win by a landslide, actually. I don't think Trump has a chance. So that's not the majority opinion. But I think finally, when enough women wake up and they see about the abortion rights, and I think when groups like African Americans, Hispanics realize that Trump is bad news for them finally. I think the polls are wrong. They're starting to shift a little bit now, but I don't. At any rate, we have an imperfect democracy striving to be more perfect, and I think it will continue. But whether democracy will persist as a political system in the face of these other four things, because once climate change stimulates huge amounts of migration, pushing from the global south to the north, making what's happening on the border now absolutely trivial. There'll be a huge amount of stress to see if a democratic system or systems can handle that. And I don't think the species is going to be extinguished, but our civilizations, our cultures may come under great stress and stop existing as we know them. And of course, we've had historical periods that's happened. After Rome fell, it took a long time. It was a period called the Dark Ages. It was light for some people, but for a lot, it was dark. There was periods in Chinese and Indian history that were people were bad off, and they're a little bit better off now. Maybe we're coming into a period when India and China will rule the world the way Europe and North America ruled the world for 100 years. Things change, and we'll see what happens. I mean, I'm probably a little too old to see what happens, though I don't feel particularly old, and I haven't suffered any noticeable cognitive decline yet. So I hope to be around to see and to participate in a lot of what's coming next.
Wonderful, wonderful, Richard. Wow, just to add a little context to this interview here, this is taking place in Greenwich Village, which is a very famous Bohemian community.
Well, no, it's taking place in Washington Square Village, which is an NYU housing.
Okay.
And Greenwich Village, as such, is a few blocks to the west. This is not taking place, in my view, in Greenwich Village. Washington Square Village is between LaGuardia Place and Mercer Street. It's really part of NYU's downtown campus. Everything around us is owned by New York University, the library, the student center, this housing complex, and so on. So I would say it's a mischaracterization to say this is taking place in Greenwich Village. It may be romantically nice to think it is, but it isn't.
No pictures of Jack Kerouac on the wall anymore?
No, Jack Kerouac.
Okay.
No.
Well, Well, full confession, I got my master's from NYU School of Education, which was also very forward-thinking and very visionary, as many or at least some NYU programs are. And there's a church over here called the Judson Memorial Church, which
Correct.
I first wandered into 25 years ago, and that was like a big awakening for me in a kind of discovery of avant-garde theater. This is a church that actually nurtured off Broadway with Al Carmine's and
Yes,
postmodern
but it did it
dance.
many, many years before that. It did it
Yes.
in the late 60s and early 1970s, and it had things like contact improvisation. It was particularly important for postmodern dance. Did not do that much for theater. Theater was centered other places. There was La Mama
Okay.
over on East 4th Street. There was the Performing Garage. There was the work of Robert Wilson in his loft. There was Richard Foreman in his loft. These were the theatrical venues. Judson was mainly a center postmodern dance. Sally Baines writes about it in her book about Judson. And I was just at Judson 2 days ago, actually, where I saw the Bread and Puppet Theater's piece on performance at the time of genocide, a very pro-Palestinian piece, but it was more than just, it wasn't just a political piece, it was a piece about the anguish about the war in Gaza, and very powerful in Judson Church. So Judson Church continues to be a center for performance activity, for political action activity, and so on. And indeed, it's on Washington Square South, I think between Sullivan Street and Thompson Street, and it is very important.
Wonderful, wonderful. One of our former guests on our show was Judith Malina,
Yes.
of the Living Theater, and here's another little story that at that time I was actually running for president of the United States, and this was in 2012, and I was going around handing out flyers, mostly symbolic candidacy, and a lot of people discouraged me and said, "You're foolish, you can't, you have a chance." The one person who encouraged me was Judith Malina.
But Judith Malina was an anarchist,
Okay.
so she wasn't hoping for you to be elected either. So she was a dyed-in-the-wool anarchist. She and her husband and lover and partner, Julian Beck, would wave the black flag of anarchy, and that was their political stance, that no government was the best government. So she supported you probably because she knew you didn't have a chance to win.
But anyway, what was significant, though, about that, and what sort of pertains to this dialogue we're having, is the streams of avant-garde art and theater, politics, activism that sort of run into performance studies.
Yeah,
right?
well, performance studies is an activist discipline. Not generically, it need not be, but a lot of the people in performance studies think of themselves, we think of ourselves as progressive. So we take stands on political matters. My microphone is disconnecting here. There we go. So we take stands on political matters and are politically active, but performance studies is not inherently political. No, it's an academic discipline. But you could say English is inherently political too. Novelists and poets are on this or that side of politics. I mean, all of academia, all of intellectual life is also involved in political life. Now, so I would not say that performance studies is particularly political in its essence. It is political in the practice of its adherence.
Okay.
And it is, for the most part, progressive. Most of performance studies people are vehemently in favor of, the rights of LGBTQ people and gay marriage and trans rights and so on and so forth as a matter of civil rights and for women's right to choose and so on. So yes, I would say that I don't know any performance studies scholar who is also a right-winger, but it would be possible and without that person not being performance studies. So there could be somebody who is pro-life and even homophobic and performance studies. That is not categorically impossible.
Richard, One of the elements of your biography that fascinates me is your time at the Performance Garage in
Performing Garage.
Performing Garage. The
Yeah, I named it Performing Garage. Performance Garage is
Yes.
a noun, and
Okay.
Performing Garage is action.
Ah.
So anyway, the name of the theater is the Performing Garage, and I wasn't with it.
Yes.
I literally founded it. So Performing Garage
Okay.
is the first theater of the Performance Group, which started as a workshop at the Tompkins Square Community Center in 1967, but it didn't get its name Performance Group until the spring of '68, and when we began working in the converted small metal stamping plant, which I christened the Performing Garage, because when I first saw it, there were two large trucks parked in it, so I thought it was used as a garage, so I called it the Performing Garage, and it was the venue for the Performance Group's Dionysus in '69 and all the other Performance Group productions from 1969 till 1980, and the earlier and the work of the people who became the Wooster Group, who were part of the Performance Group, Spalding Gray, Liz Lecomte, Ron Vorder, and others, and they all did their work there too with me and by themselves. And then in 1980, I left that theater and left the physical theater to them. The Wooster Group Incorporated, which was the name of the corporation that I formed in 1968, became the name of the producing organization, now called the Wooster Group. And Elizabeth Lecomte, who was an actor in 4 or 5 of my productions, Mother Courage, Tooth of Crime, Cops, The Maryland Project. She was also my assistant director for Commune, and then she became the artistic director of the Wooster Group, which is a very, very important, great group. Spalding Gray went off and did his own solo performances, as you know. He continued to work with the Wooster Group, but he also worked independently. And all of that work went on in the Performing Garage, 33 Wooster Street.
Spalding Gray was a huge star, in his day. He really innovated the notion of storytelling in theater. And do you remember when that was happening? What was
Sure, I was there with him when he first began experimenting with sex and death up until the age of 13 in the early 1970s at Connecticut College in Connecticut. Spalding was in the Performance Group. He played Swiss Cheese in my production of Mother Courage. He played Haas, one of the 2 lead roles in Sam Shepard's Tooth of Crime, which I directed. Spalding, and he was in other productions of mine as well. And at the same time, he was working on his telling the story of his life. It wasn't storytelling, and there were storytellers before, lots of people, Jerome Rothenberg, other people, traditional storytellers. Spalding did not invent the notion of storytelling on stage. But one of the things that he did bring to a focus is that he told the story of his own life. He did not tell other people's stories. He did not tell traditional stories. He told his stories, what happened to him, what he was thinking. So his work is mainly about that. And he also participated in other Wooster Group, Performance Group productions like Rumstick Road, which is about the suicide of his mother. Spalding also committed suicide later on. And yes, he was a fine person, a great actor, and a great innovator in that.
And William Dafoe also?
Willem, not William.
Willem, I'm sorry. Willem Dafoe, yes.
So Willem came to the Performance Group from working in Baltimore when I was doing was going to do a piece called Cops by Terry Curtis Fox, who is now the head of the playwriting division program over at NYU Tisch School of the Arts. And Willem is a fabulous actor, and he performed in that, and he performed in some Wooster Group productions directed by Lecomte, and he also worked in my balcony, and then he went off, and obviously he's a big-time movie star. So he's probably the most famous movie star, although Frances McDormand has also worked with the Wooster Group, and she's a big movie star as well. But I never worked with her. She came into the Wooster Group after I had left, so she began working later on.
And Richard, what about your own acting, your own experience.
No, I
on-
don't- I don't
Not
act.
acting, no, performing.
Well,
performing.
I don't,
Yes. What?
obviously I do this.
Okay.
And I give lectures and so on. But I'm an author and an editor. I think we need to talk about that.
Yes.
So I don't think of myself as a performer in the sense like you say you do stand-up comedy and this kind of thing. I've been in a couple of films, minor roles, and occasionally I've done a stage role because I was, some actor got sick. But it's not something that I do or I'm particularly skilled at.
Is this performance right now? Is this
Of
a
course
kind
it's a performance. It's not like a kind of, it is
This
a performance.
is a performance.
Being filmed, there's
Okay.
going to be an audience, you're asking me questions.
Ah.
We've staged it, we've tried to arrange the lighting. It's a performance in spades. It's definitely
Wow.
a performance. But I've written like 13 or 14 books, and they've been translated into many, many languages, like somewhere between 25 and 30 languages. And they range from scholarly books to, I did with my son a children's book called Engelbert Stories North to the Tropics, and I published poetry and short stories. And most recently, there's a book that
Yeah.
came out where there's going to be, this is called Inside the Performance Workshop. So I do a lot of workshopping, and this is about the technique rasa boxes and other exercises. This is a book edited by Rachel Bowditch, Paula Mary Cole, and Michelle Minnick, all of whom I work with very, very carefully, and it's called Inside the Performance Workshop, a source book for rasa boxes and other exercises. So that's just published by Routledge a few months ago, and so there's going to be I think this program will have aired. There's going to be a program about that at the Siegel Center. And then there's my journal that I've edited on and off from 1962 called TDR, the Drama Review. Now this I'm very, very proud of. This began at Tulane as the Tulane Drama Review, and the founder of it, Robert W. Corrigan, was my director of dissertations, and he also was the first dean, the founder of the Tisch School of the Arts. Before David Oppenheim was Robert Corrigan, who was the founder of this journal. So his life and mine are deeply intertwined. Corrigan passed away a number of years ago, but he was my teacher. He started the journal, which I took over from him in 1962. I took it over and I edited it until 1969, and then Michael Kirby, Erica Monk, and then Michael Kirby edited it until 1985, and then I began editing it again in 1985-86, and I'm still editing it. I'm very, very proud of this journal. It's published by NYU along with a consortium that includes Yale University, Stanford University, Brown University, and the Shanghai Theater Academy. It's published by Cambridge University Press and distributed all over the world in thousands of universities and so on. But it has a small circulation in relationship to people who have the whole thing. So I'd like to have more people read the whole thing as a unit rather than essay by essay. At any rate, I'm very pleased with TDR.
Well, I'm signing up.
Good.
I'm signing up. The thought just occurred to me, Richard, during this dialogue in terms of the democratic empowerment of performance studies. Like, for example, you have people who are actors, who are performers, who are celebrities, and they get all this attention, you know what I mean? And then it's like everybody else, right? But with performance studies, it's almost like, well, we all are performers in a way in our everyday lives, right? Isn't there something very, like shy people can take refuge in this notion that,
Well, yes, I think performance studies says that we all are performers. Whether that's enabled, whether that makes a shy person less shy, I don't know. But at the same time, as George Orwell said, all animals are equal, but some are more equal than others. So it would be a lie to say that it's democratic in that sense. It may be theoretically democratic that all are equal, but it's not so. You're interviewing me. You're not interviewing a performance studies student. And if you, I don't know if you would just jump over and go and interview a performance studies master's student or undergraduate. Probably not. You're interviewing me because it's me. So even as we celebrate this democracy, which we shouldn't be in bad faith, as Sartre would say, or lie about it. And unless you are going to go and do that, it'll be like candid camera, But I don't think so. I think you seek out people who already have a certain reputation and clout. That's who you want to interview for the most part. So there's, we're a primate species, and it's hard to avoid certain hierarchies. What we need to avoid is lying about those hierarchies, saying they don't exist when they do exist, and not finding strategies within the structures, social structures we have, to guarantee equal justice. That is where equality, equal justice under law, is where democracy is most powerful. So democracy does not say that all people are equal, but it says when it comes to the law, they should be treated equally. And that's very, very important. They should be treated regardless of economic status, race, ethnicity, religion, etc. That's extremely important axiom of democracy. But axiom of democracy is not that all people are equal in all things. They are not. There are certain fundamental biological things we're not equal in. We're not all the same height. We're not all the same weight. We don't all have the same benefits of health. Some people are, ridden with disease, and other people are not. We're not all mentally equal, etc., etc. There are many, many ways in which we're not equal, but we can try to assure that we're equal before the law, and that's a very important matter.
I was going to say something about Richard Foreman, because you said you recently saw Richard Foreman.
Richard Foreman is a great playwright and director. He's now he's about my age, in his mid to late 80s, and a play of his called Symphony of Rats, which is about the consciousness of being a president of the United States, though not Donald Trump nor the president in 1984 when he wrote the play, is on at the Performing Garage. It's an excellent, excellent production. It's not the way Foreman would have directed the play. He did direct it in 1984, but it's the using his text and doing a Wooster Group version of his text. Of course, by the time this airs, I think it'll probably be off the boards, but it may be touring someplace, or it may come back in an excellent production.
Richard, I wanted to say something about the media, because this show is part of the media, but our show airs on public access cable in New York, which is seen by about, I don't know what our audience is, but it's not like we don't get the overnights of a Rachel Maddow or mainstream media. What would change? What needs to change in terms of the media, in terms of the content? What is your take on the mainstream media in terms of they show the same thing all day long, and they're not? Is there a criticism?
Well, I'm not I like live performance. I'm not a media. I don't know what you can ask me specifically. Yes, I watch MSNBC.
Yeah.
But I also watch Fox News, because I want to see different extreme representations of points of opinion. I watch a lot of PBS, which I like, and I watch a lot of sports on TV. I guess what I use media for mostly is to watch sports. So I follow the Mets. I want to see how Tiger Woods is doing in the Masters. So I like sports, but I'm not a media buff. I don't use my cell phone for media. I'm not very active on Facebook. Occasionally I post something. I did post a brief review of the Wooster Group's version of Symphony of Rats. I wanted people to see it. So sometimes I post, but I'm not on there all the time. I have a whole bunch of quote friends who are not friends. Some are, some are not. But I'm not active on social media. I do think that social media has a destructive aspect to it, in the sense that when people are so engaged this way, they're not engaged in the face-to-faceness that even we're having sitting in this room. And that people exist in their silos, and it's called social media, but in a certain way it's anti-social media. As far as the larger media is concerned, the cable network universe and the network universe, you have to realize that these are always, to some degree, representing the corporate interests that sponsors them, and you have to take it with Brechtian, a grain of salt. I like Joe Scarborough, and Morning Joe. But I know that this is kind of like his and their program and what their, you mentioned Rachel Maddow and,
Yes.
and so on. They have their slot of quote guests and experts, and so does Fox News. It's interesting what they emphasize back and forth. They don't focus on the same thing. In a very weird way, MSNBC is much more Trump obsessed than Fox News. Fox News, covers a lot of other things, and they are right wing, but Donald Trump is not out of their mouth 24/7. But he is 24/7 on MSNBC. So it's a kind of interesting thing that the devil there, from their point of view, is what gets all the attention. I wonder what would happen if we had a kind of media silence on Trump. I think he would more or less wither on the vine to some degree. I think the less attention paid to him, the better off we are.
Well, let me just say right now, before the end of the show, that there ought to be a documentary film about you, sir, unless there has been one already.
No, there's been a long interview made with me for about 6 hours by a man named Steve Watson, and I think it'll be available through NYU, the Skirball Center. But I would love to have a documentary made about me.
Yeah.
I'm egotistical enough, and I've lived a very interesting life.
But you're the kind of person who, were you on Charlie Rose?
No.
Then Charlie made a big mistake.
I'm sure he did.
But Charlie Rose never really looked below 14th Street, I noticed.
That I don't know. I didn't watch Charlie Rose that much, but I would have been on him.
Yes.
And if here I am, I'm saying, if somebody wants to have me on every once a month to just comment on the world on a kind of regular basis.
Well, here's the larger problem here, because I don't see media really as covering culture anymore. I don't see the big shows at all talking about culture. The only time they mention a movie on like Channel 11 PIX, they only talk about how much money it made. I remember when Gene Shalit would come on and talk about the movie itself,
Right.
But they don't do that. So there's a cultural absence in our media.
Sometimes PBS on its thing called Canvas.
Except for PBS,
yes, you're right. I mean, it's all about, getting the advertising and the viewers and so on and so forth.
Do you enjoy talking about performance studies to people who don't know about performance studies?
Not
Let's say you're at a party.
No.
Oh, okay.
I first of all, I don't like parties particularly.
Okay.
I like to go out one-on-one with people and talk.
Yes.
I'm not a big party goer. I can't remember, this past, of course with COVID there were fewer parties, but I'll go to a party with my family, I'll go to a Passover Seder, that kind of thing. But go to a party and sit around with a cocktail or something, no, I don't do it. So, but when I do, like I'm meeting Satish Adhikar at 4 o'clock today. I meet a lot of people at Lanterna di Vittorio. I'll give a nice
That's where we had lunch twice.
Yes, that's my office out of. So, but I meet people there one at a time, and we have a conversation. But I'm not interested in going to a party because the talk is usually trivial, and if you get serious, people move on, and I'm not that. It just doesn't interest me.
You're not into small talk, in other words.
I'm not into small talk. Okay. I'm not into just milling around. I do like to go to the theater if I can, and I do like to meet people individually or 2 or 3 people at a time. But a large party, no. A cocktail party, no.
Broadway versus off-Broadway?
It depends on the instance. It depends what you consider Broadway. Now, Circle in the Square, started off Broadway, now has a Broadway theater. The gap is not as great as it used to be. So I saw Jessica Chastain in Dollhouse. I thought that was a brilliant production. I thought her performance was excellent. I will see Enemy of the People. I will see Uncle Vanya. Now that's at Lincoln Center, and so I don't know if that's Broadway or not. And then I do go to La Mama. I do go to the Performing Garage. I go off of, but I take it thing by thing. My brother, who is very different than I, bought a ticket and took me and his wife and a few other people to Spamalot. It wasn't exactly my cup of tea. I would not buy a ticket myself. and I've more or less forgotten it before I even saw it. But it's okay, you know. It was kind of harmless. So
Yes. One of the things I love that you wrote is about how the whole idea of a performance, how it's structured. There's the before, there's the after.
yeah, there's the 9 steps
Yes.
in the textbook. So there's the practice, training, workshop, and then warm up, performance, cool down. Yes, there's a performance sequence. I mean, I do recommend my performance studies and introduction strongly to people, published by Routledge. They want to see what performance studies is from my point of view.
Okay. I'm going to look in the camera and recommend now to CNN and MSNBC, have this man on, create a new, a cultural pundit. How about
there
that?
you go.
We have pundits in everything else. We have pundits in law, business, politics. What about culture?
I'm up for it, and you can probably have me at equity minimum.
There you go. There you go. Oh my goodness. Mountains to climb. What's the future? What do you
Well, I'm
wanna
working
accomplish?
on. There's a book of mine called Schechner Plays, not the plays of Schechner, but Schechner Plays, which are 12 of my theatrical texts, ranging from the time when I was very young, the 1950s, the mid 1950s, to Imagining O, which was 2014. So they're a book of texts, and that's in press now. I'm working through the copy edits. Then I'm doing the 5th edition of Performance Studies, a textbook, which will be the final edition that I'll work on. I think 5 editions is enough. And that book began in 2001, I think, and the 5th edition will be 2025. And then I'm doing a book on the Ram Leela of Ramnagar. We didn't talk about my fieldwork in Asia, but it's a 31-day cycle play performed in Varanasi, which is also a town called Benares, Kashi, the so-called holy city of India. And this is a play that tells the entire life of Ram and his wife Sita and his brothers Lakshman, Bharat, and Shatrughan. And it takes 31 days to perform, and it takes place all around the city of Ramnagar. It's a vast play, and the audience is on some days it's 2,000, other days it's up to 75 or 80,000. It always incorporates movement and participation. It's great production, and I'm writing a book about that.
Wonderful, wonderful, and just it's such a joy to be in your office here. Claudia going to show a little bit all the wonderful artifacts and masks and paintings and photographs. It's such a cultural space. Books, tons of books, and it just has a spirit. It has a feeling to it that's just so lovely. And
so I wonder about this space, which I love.
Yeah.
What's going to happen when I die? What's going to happen to all this stuff?
this could be the Museum of Performance Studies.
Yeah, it could be, but it won't be, because first of all, NYU will want to rent it out. My heirs will probably want to sell the books. I don't know what the art. I don't know. I would love it to be kept someplace. At one point, somebody in China said, "We'll take it to China and we'll keep it." But what good will it do in China? They can't. Most of them can't read the books and so on and so forth.
Let's get William Dafoe on the phone.
Willem.
I'm sorry.
What are we going
Willem.
to do when we get him on the phone?
Tell him that he can help create a museum.
Where?
For right here.
No, they can't create a
they
museum.
can't. Well,
This is
somewhere
NYU.
else.
This
All
is
right.
NYU property.
Okay.
NYU will not.
Okay.
Will not give this property up. It's,
Well, where would it be? Where?
I have no idea. All I'm saying is
Okay.
that I do appreciate what's here. It ranges from the bureau that was my father's to a desk to masks from Papua New Guinea and from India and all over, and Bali, and portraits of me that my mother made because she was a painter, and lots of things. It's very dear to me, and I do wonder. And all my notebooks with thousands of pages of notes, they're going to Princeton. Princeton would be a place. If somebody would make a museum, that would be great. So Willem, come on, chip in a couple of $1 million. We'll make a museum.
Let's do
A
it.
house museum. That would be good.
Oh, fantastic, fantastic.
Why are you taking Spanish classes?
¿Por qué? Because el mundo hablan español en Nueva York. So, and I want to, two reasons. So many people speak Spanish in New York. I want to be able to engage, although obviously the Spanish that's spoken here is much too rapid for me, but I try. And secondly, that kind of exercise is good for the brain at this stage of my life. So there are two things I do for my brain. I do physical exercises quite rigorously, but I play chess and I study Spanish. If I finish with Spanish, I'll go on to some other language. But I do Duolingo, and it's not bad. But I now have to start watching Spanish movies, but the Spanish here is either from the islands or from Mexico or Latin America. It's all different than what you get on Duolingo, but I disfruta. It's very. I like it a lot.
Even for me, when I came here, the Spanish from the Caribbean was like, I was in shock because the Spanish from Bogota was completely different.
Yes, absolutely, absolutely, but I'm enjoying it. It's on my phone, and I do it every day.
Well, I just want to say in closing, Richard, it's been such a delight to know you, and it's wonderful to have you as a friend.
Well, it's good to be on the program.
Great to have these dialogues with you. Thank you so much.
So I hope a lot of people watch
Appreciate so much. Yes, indeed.
Let me know if you're watching. Send John or me, rs4@nyu.edu, an email so I know that this was not just broadcast out into the universe and didn't reach anyone.
Yes. It's going to. Thank you, Richard.